Hey everyone, today let's look through every major possible license that could come to DBD and judge how likely it is to get added to the game. I got all of you to give me over 50 reasonable licenses you could think of for me to discuss, so here's our tier list and let's get into it. Star Wars. This is obviously a rather controversial license and one of the more horror adjacent ones out there, however it is huge and would be great for the game. There's also plenty of options for a Star Wars chapter with its vast array of characters to pick from. You could go with a more classic look for the chapter with Vader and Luke as killer and survivor, or you could reach further into the universe's endless stories and games to find something a bit more horrific. I'd prefer the classic route, but I'd be happy either way. It would fit. Dexter. The beauty of Dexter, I think, is that he could possibly be added as both a survivor and killer. He'd fit better as a survivor for sure, but reasonably could be manipulated by the entity into killing the innocent survivors, much like many other characters we already have in the game. Dexter as a character has plenty of interest and iconic things and looks to pull from for his perks and outfits and everything, and I think he'd be a great fit as a survivor who can fight back in some way. He would of course only be a half chapter though, so it would work as a half chapter. Baldur's Gate 3. This one I could also feasibly seeing happen, however definitely on the lower end of things or priority, as it would essentially be a second D&D chapter, which was already a somewhat controversial and horror adjacent one. I've not played the game myself, but I know there's a bunch of characters in there that would be worthwhile having in DBD, so it would fit. Friday the 13th, probably the easiest home run DBD has, with it being an obvious choice to get added to the game, and debatably the game's most needed license at this point for it to feel complete. Jason is sort of the inspiration for Trapper, and Friday as a whole inspired DBD at its core, so it would be a perfect fit, let's be honest. Jurassic Park. This is an interesting one, and one I'm admittedly kind of skeptical on, due to the killer of this chapter presumably being a dinosaur. I don't think you can really add a Jurassic Park chapter without one, so there's gotta be one surely. How they would do this though is the real question. I think it's plausible we get this chapter, with a killer like a velociraptor or something. Chucky was added to the game, so hey, it's possible, and I do think it fits. There's also a bunch of options for survivors, so it would fit. Jaws. This kind of has the same issues, with the main issue with this chapter not being its content, but instead the plausibility of it working in the game. The best concepts I've seen for Jaws working have proposed that all maps can be either flooded, which seems too technically awkward, or for Jaws himself to move around in a pool of water that flows with him. This kind of works, but equally seems a bit goofy, maybe a little too goofy for DBD, so Jaws for me goes to it's unlikely to work or fit. Smile. These films follow a creepy smiling entity that slowly stalks and kills people. I did like these movies and found them pretty creepy, especially when you see the true form of the creature, but I'm not sure how well this would work as a killer or as a power, with it being very focused on perception from the person being stalked. Therefore, I think just from a technical standpoint, this killer doesn't quite work, so it doesn't work or fit. The Boys. This seems like a home run license to add in my opinion, with it having plenty of horror within the series, even from the opening moments where someone is liquidized or liquefied, one of those. The soups of this universe are horrible people, and Homelander would be a near perfect DBD addition I think, being very Wesker-esque with his presence, and having a lot of abilities to choose for his power. You of course also have a solid choice of survivors to pick from, with the boys themselves. I'd say either Butcher or Huey being the two frontrunners, or even go for a soup survivor and have Starlight, which could be cool as well. It would be a perfect fit. Dark Souls. So for this one I've sort of grouped together all these Souls games and Elden Ring, as lots of you mentioned these. Whilst I've not played any of the Souls, I have played Elden Ring, and I think it would fit DBD, although definitely with a bit of adjacency. There's plenty of horrific bosses that could work well in DBD though, in all honesty, and bring along a cool vibe. There's no clear survivor from Elden Ring specifically, as it's more of a custom job, but I think they could do a similar thing to D&D and add a representative, semi-original character like Astri and Bearmar, so it would fit. The casting of Frank Stone. This is kind of cheating I guess, because obviously Behavior already owns the license to Frank Stone and can presumably add him whenever. However, I thought I'd mention it anyway. This is of course DBD's spin-off game, which featured Frank Stone as the game's titular character and antagonist. This game was fun but didn't seem to do so well. However, I'd love if they added Frank Stone and possibly a survivor or two as well, as there's a bunch to choose from. I'd say Linda is probably the best pick. This is a must-add in my opinion and easily doable, so it would be a perfect fit. Outlast. Outlast has a bunch of games, but the one I think is probably the best to add to DBD is Outlast Trials, which is the much more recent co-op game, which I'd even say shares some elements with DBD. The entire game has a very freaky vibe and reminds me a lot of Doctor's chapter and its MK Ultra focus. This game is packed with various characters to pick from for killers, such as Mother Gooseberry, Leland Coyle or the Police Warden, or maybe even one of the newer characters like Lilia. There could be a survivor for this as well, but I could feasibly see it working well as just a killer-only chapter too. I think this would be a great fit, and so it would be a perfect fit. Fallout is tricky as a series because it has such a wide variety of characters and varying appearances throughout the games, especially as they change so much. Then there's the show as well. It's very hard. The series also doesn't necessarily have a definitive villain or anything like that, and so a killer is kind of hard as well. I don't think it should be like a Deathclaw or something like that either, because that seems a bit strange with them just being animals. There are far more iconic survivors though, which is why this license fits DBD in the first place in my opinion, in the fact that it's so focused on survival, much like Tomb Raider or something like that. One of the Vault Dweller protagonists would be great, possibly even Lucy from the show, so maybe a survivor in each chapter could work for this one, or maybe even just cosmetics, add just the vault suits or something. So this could work cosmetic only. The Evil Within. I'm not super familiar with this license, but it's got a horror focus and some iconic characters, so I'm sure it would fit well. The survivor would be Sebastian, and then the killer, I've seen a variety of concepts featuring lots of different options, so I imagine there's quite a few to pick from for this series. It looks kinda similar to Resident Evil or Silent Hill's offerings, so it would fit. Hannibal. So whilst this one is horror, I don't think it works very well when it comes to it fitting DBD, mostly just because Hannibal just isn't the kind of killer where I could see him roaming around a map, breaking pallets and whatever. It's an iconic villain, but this doesn't make it a good fit for DBD automatically. He also kind of lacks a power, I'd say, just being a guy, so I'm gonna say it doesn't work or fit. This is debatably the biggest license or most hyped chapter that is yet to come for DBD, which has been theorized about endlessly. The core of this chapter would of course be Pennywise the Clown, and likely some of the Losers Club as survivors. This would be a perfect fit for DBD, and there's plenty of potential with Pennywise's power due to him having so many abilities. I think this is an easy home run, it would be a perfect fit. Megan. This is more of a curveball choice, but I think it could be interesting as it would be nice to have some more modern horror properties in the game. She does fit I think as well, but probably as a killer-only half chapter, as I don't think any of the survivor-type characters are iconic enough. Megan would present a unique type of horror as well, although having a bit of a crossover with some other characters like Chucky I suppose, so she goes to it would fit. Scream. There's been a lot of requests over the years for licenses like Scream, even though we have Ghostface in the game. Scream obviously having another kind of Ghostface, and therefore it would be odd I think to add a second one. However, I could see them adding some kind of Scream survivor type characters, most notably Sydney. This could work as a half chapter I think, and potentially a current Ghosty could get a Scream skin or something like that, so it would work as cosmetics maybe. A Nightmare on Elm Street. This kind of follows on in the same vein, as lots of people want OG Freddy added from the original Nightmare on Elm Street films. Whilst I do see the appeal in this, I personally think it's unnecessary to be honest, and it would also just be weird having two Freddys, much like with the Scream situation. I'd say it's unlikely to work or fit. Addam's Family. This one is more geared toward the Wednesday series, which is another I personally think is tonally not quite the right fit, as Wednesday is definitely geared toward a younger audience, and I think it would be odd to see such horrible violence committed toward Wednesday in a game, so I'm gonna go with it's unlikely to work or fit. Predator. This is another one of the few remaining huge horror properties that would absolutely fit DBD, and it seems almost inevitable to be honest, with us already getting Alien. We could get a whole 2v8 for example with Predator and Alien, which would go insanely hard. Predator could of course be the killer and then Dutch as the survivor. That would be cool. I'm personally not a huge Predator fan, but I would be so down for that. Yeah, it would be a perfect fit. Bioshock. This is another license I'm not too familiar with, but the character people seem to want the most from it is the Big Daddy. And it's like, why do we need him? We've already got the Oni. But yeah, sure, we could add this too, I guess. I think it would work from what I've seen of the series, which isn't directly horror, but definitely adjacent, and so it would fit. Scooby Doo. A goofy idea, but I think ultimately this just doesn't work, and mainly because it's just a tonal, completely lacking fit. You can't really add a kid's show to a game like this, but maybe some charms or something. I doubt the license holders want to be in DBD though, unfortunately, so at most it would be a cosmetic only chapter, but probably fairly unlikely. Slenderman. Slenderman is a classic of internet horror, and so I think it would fit DBD, aside maybe a few problems with the power, as the whole idea of Slenderman is trying to not look at him, and so I'm not sure how this works as a mechanic. Maybe it would have to be sort of an inverse version of Unknown. Either way, I think in many ways we kind of need Slenderman as an important horror figure that is otherwise unrepresented, so it would be a perfect fit. Squid Game. This is kind of a weird one in my opinion, and is one of the licenses that sort of drags into just being a bit like Fortnite. I don't see why we need this, but equally I wouldn't mind it as cosmetics for example, like the numbered suits for survivors would be fine, so it could work as cosmetics only. Terminator. Terminator is another one of those licenses that seems like sort of a no-brainer. I think you could easily add the Terminator as a half chapter for example. It's such an iconic villain and could have so many varying skins too, if you wanted all of the different Terminator types from across the films as well, so it would be a perfect fit. Terrifier. Terrifier is another more modern horror property that I just think fits really well in DBD, with Art the Clown being such a characterful character and having tons of personality despite being silent throughout the films. He could have so many good interactions with survivors like this, and I think a power could be made. He's got that endless bag of weapons I'm sure he could use. It would be a perfect fit. The Purge. This is one that, whilst being a pretty large horror property, I don't think it really works at all for DBD, or at least it doesn't need to be in DBD, because the horrors or killers of the Purge are just sort of people with masks on, and I feel like Legion sort of have that covered. I think this could be a cool cosmetic drop though, so it could work as cosmetic only. The Shining. This is another Stephen King property, and one which I do think does have a lot of potential, although does maybe lack a notable power for the main killer of Jack. I think for this reason it maybe doesn't work so well, also because the main villain of The Shining is really the hotel, so maybe it's unlikely to work or fit as much as I want it. The Thing. This is sort of the same deal, where whilst I do think it has a lot of potential, the entire idea of the Thing and its power is blending in and deceptively taking down a crew. I think powers like this just don't really work in DBD, like the whole idea of a killer who blends in somehow with the survivors just doesn't really work mechanically beyond the first few encounters with them, and so I think it's unlikely to work or fit. American Psycho. This one's a funny suggestion, but I think it's not really a license that needs to be in DBD at all, to be honest. The core character of Patrick Bateman would be funny and super weird, to be honest, to see in DBD, so it doesn't work or fit. The Last of Us. This is another license that seems fairly obvious to eventually add, as it's a very popular horror-focused game from the last couple decades, and has clear and key survivors with Ellie and Joel. I'd like this to be done in a Walking Dead type of way, adding these two as survivors, but not having a killer, as I don't believe it's necessary, so it could work as a half chapter. A Quiet Place. This is another I could see maybe working but being quite technically difficult. The survivors could work, I guess, but I think the core of this franchise are the Death Angels, and they would be hard to implement with them relying on sound mainly, and so I think it's unlikely to work or fit. Candyman. This is one that's been circling like crazy since like the 4th year anniversary. I don't know much about Candyman, but he seems to be a lot more iconic and known in the US, as I've personally never heard of him. However, from what I've seen, he looks like a good fit and could have a B power or something, so yeah, it would fit. The Conjuring. This is another license that focuses more so on the survivor type characters over the killers, although there are some more notable names in the series like the Nun. I don't think that would be a great fit though, and so adding the two Warrens would be plenty. It could work as a half chapter. Doom. This is a fairly quick one for me, as I just think it doesn't quite fit DBD, even if it does tonally fit. I'm just not sure how you could add the Doom guy, for example, maybe as a skin for someone, but ultimately I think it just doesn't quite track personally, so it doesn't work or fit. Hotline Miami. This is one I'm not all too familiar with, but the character of Jacket seems to be a highly requested character from this series, and from what I've seen of the character it seems he would fit well, especially with his fun and iconic look. It could work as a half chapter. Resident Evil 7 to 9. So this would be a Resident Evil Part 3, and would cover the newer games in this series that take on the first-person perspective, which debatably are a better fit for DBD and its themes than the older games. There's also plenty of characters to choose from for both survivors and killers, Ethan or Grace being the clearest survivor picks, and then possibly a character like Jack Baker from RE7 or one of the Lords from RE8 would work great as a killer. RE is proven already, and I'm only going to put this one lower as we already have so much RE content in the game, so it would fit. Dead Space. This is another one I'm not all too familiar with, but again, from what I've seen it looks like it would fit very well, having a horror focus and featuring a great option for a new survivor in Isaac Clarke, who fights what is essentially space zombies from my understanding. So this could be a perfect half chapter, I think. Death Stranding. I know barely anything about this aside the fact that it has Norman Reedus in it, and I think for that reason alone, I'm not sure how this would work, as the character does not look different enough from Daryl, so it would be kind of weird I think, so it doesn't work or fit. DC. This one covers the entire DC universe, and is an interesting one, as I do see the vision somewhat. I've seen some great concepts, for example, for a character like Scarecrow to be added as a killer. I think going the Joker route wouldn't be such a great fit. The same with adding someone like Batman or something like that as a survivor, but I do think there is a lot of possibility with this license, it just depends on how much you'd want to give it. So maybe it would work as a half chapter. Marvel. Marvel is in the same vein, and there's some characters that often get floated a lot for a possible Marvel chapter, such as Venom and characters like that, which could work I think, although I think in general DC would be the better pick of the two with its generally darker and more grounded vibe, at least in recent years, so it's unlikely to work or fit. Life is Strange is another fairly odd pick in my opinion, and whilst I do like the games, I'm not sure they quite work as additions, and they do feel like they're pushing the horror adjacency somewhat. So whilst I think an addition of Max or someone could be cool, I'd say this one doesn't quite work, so it doesn't work or fit. Supernatural. This seems like a sort of no-brainer in my opinion to add Sam and Dean Winchester to the game, but I do think do it more so in the fashion of The Walking Dead as a half chapter, and possibly a map with some kind of inspired main tile from Supernatural, as I feel the core of this show is definitely these two, and not so much a specific villain, so it would work as a half chapter. Mortal Kombat. This is another one where I do question whether it's a great fit for the game just due to the style of Mortal Kombat. I think due to it being one of those kinds of roster games, it would work better as skins. Mortal Kombat has so many iconic characters from over the years, and I could see loads of them feasibly fitting onto various killers, and so I'd say the best route for him is this, so it would work as cosmetic only. Hunger Games. This is another sort of curveball I'd say, as whilst it does feature a survivor character with Katniss in a pretty horrific world, I'm not sure DBD is still the perfect fit, as I feel like it's not quite the same vibe match, especially as these films are definitely geared toward a younger audience, so I'd say it doesn't work or fit. Uncharted. This is another one that would work as a half chapter probably, if they were to add Nathan Drake. It could be a similar thing to when they added Lara, as the two are relatively similar. It could work as a half chapter. Breaking Bad. Now this is for sure a curveball, maybe a bit of a weird one, and yeah, it probably doesn't fit realistically, but I wanted to talk about it briefly, as I do think adding a character like Walter White would kinda work, with him being a survivor. He could have perks inspired by his chemistry, and intelligence and stuff like that. It would be funny seeing him delusionally rant in the realm, but ultimately I think it's unlikely to work or fit. Dead Meat. This is a fun little idea to add both of the two key hosts of Dead Meat, James and Chelsea. This could be a similar deal to the Nicolas Cage half chapter with some fun perks and voice lines and that sort of thing. So yeah, I'd be down. It could also just be skins to be honest, so maybe it would work best as a cosmetic only chapter. Metal Gear Solid. This could work I think as just a solo survivor chapter adding Solid Snake to the game as the series' core protagonist. It's maybe a bit of an odd fit, but I mean we've had Rainbow Six and also like Trevor Belmont and people like that, so why not, right? It could work as a half chapter. Shaun of the Dead. Weirdly this one I'd actually love to see, as I think there's such a lack of horror comedy licenses in the game, which hey, is a part of the genre still and deserves representation. Shaun of the Dead however wouldn't need to be a whole chapter or anything like that, as it doesn't really have a clear killer, but rather a large survivor cast. I think just adding Shaun as a Dwight Skinsey would be plenty, so it would work as a cosmetic only chapter. Dying Light. Dying Light is another great horror-focused video game that could easily fit into the world of DBD, with key protagonists from its games to pull from, such as Kyle or Aiden. The harder part for Dying Light is identifying a killer, but I suppose there are the volatiles, although I do find them somewhat generic as they are a repeat enemy. The series kind of lacks notable villains to be honest, with the zombies being more of the scare factor anyway. Regardless, I could see it working, so it would work as a half chapter. The Backrooms. This one's interesting, and one which is tricky I think, is the most iconic thing about the Backrooms is the Backrooms themselves, and so therefore this could feasibly be a map-focused chapter maybe, in which case I think it would work very well, although maybe hard to implement as the whole vibe of the Backrooms is they're endless and confusing, so I'm not sure this quite works. There is of course also the movie coming out soon, which would maybe make this more plausible, but yeah, a Backrooms chapter without the Backrooms just seems a bit silly, so for this I'd say it's unlikely to work or fit. League of Legends. This is probably going to be a controversial one, but I've seen pretty good arguments for this as a chapter, specifically the addition of Fiddlesticks, who is kind of a bit like Unknown apparently in vibe. I have played League, unfortunately, but never actually encountered this character. There's also like a ton of characters though that I think would be great as skins, like a Caitlyn skin for example, get some arcane characters in there, so it would work great as cosmetics I think. Grand Theft Auto. This is a bit of a curveball license and definitely not the greatest fit, but I do think it could be interesting to add one or all of the GTA 5 protagonists into the game, potentially as survivors, or I've even heard arguments for characters like Trevor as a killer, so it's unlikely to work or fit, but it's kind of funny. Hitman. This is kind of in the same vein where it probably doesn't work realistically. It would be kind of cool to see Hitman DVD, but it's not really got any sense to it, so it's unlikely to work or fit. Payday. This one I personally just don't really see the point of. Payday does have some cool masks and outfits though, which would maybe work, but in terms of a chapter, I just don't think it does at all. So it would work as cosmetics only maybe. FNAF Part 2. This one to me seems almost inevitable after the success of the first chapter. It would presumably once again be a killer and a map, more than likely. The biggest contender I've seen is for the Mimic to be added, which does seem plausible. I feel like adding more FNAF is basically a home run and would do very well, so it would be a perfect fit. Left 4 Dead Part 2. This is one I've seen mentioned quite a bit as well, and honestly, I just don't really see the point to some extent. We've got Bill, who's great, and then we've also gotten outfits to represent a bunch of the other characters. We don't really need a killer for this, I'd say, and so I just don't really see the point of adding more Left 4 Dead characters. Maybe via cosmetics would be fine, so cosmetic only maybe. Saw Part 2. Whilst I love Saw and it's probably my favourite of DBD's movie properties, I really don't think we need more, in all honesty. I think we kind of nailed it the first time, and we don't need to add anything else from Saw. Again though, maybe some skins like a Hoffman skin for Pig could be cool, so it could be cosmetic only. Pirates of the Caribbean. This is just straight up a no for me. It's a funny suggestion, but I just don't see it. And this one I think is going too far into the Fortnite direction, just having like no relevance at all really. It doesn't work or fit. Godzilla, this is kind of the same thing. It does work more than Pirates, I think, but it just feels kind of silly. You can't really add Godzilla. You can, I guess, but I mean, I feel his whole thing is that he's big, and so if you shrink him down for DBD, it sort of ruins the whole point, so it doesn't work or fit. Doctor Who. This is a license I could definitely get behind, as it's one that features a lot of potential characters for survivors, but not so much for killers I think, as no Doctor Who villains really suit the violence of the realm that well. I would love if we got a Matt Smith Doctor appearance though, or one of the earlier reboot ones, as I think they're the most iconic, and would also fit a hopeful survivor role. There are options too for a killer character, and so therefore it goes to it would fit, but definitely hard to pick a killer I think. Call of Duty Zombies. This is one that I think would fit DBD so well, with COD Zombies having so many casts of characters that would work very well as survivors, all pretty much prepped with voice lines as well. Get in the original 4 or even some of the crews from the other games. It doesn't need to have a killer for this, as there's never really been a standout killer, aside some iconic bosses like the Panzer. It could work as a half chapter. Until Dawn. This has been a very talked about license that I think does work very well for DBD. It's just maybe slightly more irrelevant now than it used to be, maybe a few years ago, or even back when they did the remaster. It does have some great choices for killers and survivors though, with the Wendigos as the killer and then also all of the options for a survivor. Pretty much any of the casts would work well for this. It would fit. Killer Klowns. This is another fairly big horror license, but one which I'm going to rule out only because there's a fairly recent Killer Klowns game, which makes this one pretty unlikely, so it's unlikely to work or fit. Ghostbusters. This is another one that I think would work great just as some cosmetics. It's not full horror, but is sort of horror comedy, and as I said earlier, this is fairly lacking in DBD, and therefore I'd like to see some survivors possibly get some ghost-busting suits, so it could work as cosmetic only. The Grudge. This one I'm personally not so interested in, as it does feel like repeating something we already have, with us having like Sadako and characters like that. Whilst they obviously aren't literally the same, they do share very close visuals and similar ideas behind their powers, so it doesn't work or fit. Poppy Playtime. This is often compared to FNAF in tone, and whilst I do agree, I think it definitely doesn't fit as well, at least with its visual style. I don't see it translating into DBD as well personally, so it's unlikely to work or fit. Alright, well, that's gonna do it. I do hope you enjoyed, and let me know your thoughts as always down below. Thanks, and goodbye.